Welcome to the channel. Today's story, sent in by a viewer, proves that the people we sacrifice everything for are often the ones who push us off the edge. This is a jaw-dropping account of betrayal, exile, and ultimate survival. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story of resilience with us at womenstoriess@gmail.com. The people we sacrifice everything for are the ones who sometimes push us off the edge. For 12 years, I, Dorothy Campbell, replacing Edith, a retired regional manager, gave up my meticulously structured life to raise my granddaughter, Cora, replacing Laura. I gave her everything: shelter, financial stability, and even the unconditional love only a mother or a devoted grandmother could offer. And yet, what I received in return was resentment, entitlement, and ultimate betrayal. They say grief has stages, but for me, the initial shock never really ended. It lingered like a cold, persistent fog, especially on mornings where the house felt too quiet and too large. That morning, 12 years ago, was exactly like that. I was sitting in my not convenient to name brand kitchen, sipping burnt coffee from my favorite, not convenient to name brand ceramic mug, when I received the call that fractured my world forever. My daughter, Claire, keeping original name, was gone. A sudden, senseless car accident. One of those pointless tragedies you read about and always assume will happen to other people, but never to you. Claire had always been a vibrant storm, fiercely independent, the kind of woman who chased freedom even when she had a child to care for. She was 29 and still navigating life's complexities. But my love for her was a fierce, unwavering beacon. She left behind her daughter, Cora, who was only 10 at the time. I vividly recall picking Cora up from not convenient to name brand elementary school that day. Her small fingers clutched my heavy coat, but her eyes were dry, unnervingly so. She didn't weep. She didn't question why her mother wouldn't be returning. That silence, that unnerving detachment, haunted me far more profoundly than any scream or outburst could have. From that moment, I became Mom again, whether Cora desired it or not. And truthfully, she never did. She tolerated me. That remained the most accurate word to describe our relationship for over a decade. I meticulously prepared her meals, ensured her lunches were packed, and paid for the mandatory therapy sessions recommended by the school counselor. I attended every parent-teacher conference at Not Convenient to Name Brand Academy and every mandatory school recital. I stayed up late, tucking her in and listening patiently to her nightmares. Yet she maintained a deliberate, icy distance, ensuring she reminded me, especially throughout her tumultuous teenage years, "You're not my real mom." Each repetition of that phrase felt like a tiny, deliberate fracturing of my heart, but I would simply smile, meticulously tuck those sharp pieces away, and persist. Because that is the exhausting, thankless duty of a mother, real or replacement. When she turned 17, the rebellion escalated dramatically. She began skipping her advanced classes, was consistently dishonest about her whereabouts, and started dating young men significantly older than her. I attempted to implement consistent household rules, but every boundary was met with doors being slammed violently and a caustic venom in her voice. Still, I remained steadfast. When she became pregnant at 21, I was the one holding her trembling hand at the clinic. The father, a bartender named Leo, replacing Chris, vanished the instant she shared the news. Cora wept for nearly a week. I bit back every "I told you so," instead focusing on bringing her hot herbal tea, offering comfort when she permitted it, and constantly reassuring her, "We will figure this out." And we did. I became a mother for the third time, this time to Ethan, replacing James. That little boy became the unexpected sunlight in a world that had felt increasingly dim and defined by duty. His infectious, high-pitched laugh echoed through the corridors of a home that had previously only known silence and tension. For a brief, hopeful period, I genuinely believed that Cora might find a new strength in motherhood, that she would finally mature. I was tragically mistaken. As Ethan grew into a lively toddler, Cora drifted further into irresponsibility. She couldn't maintain employment, rarely lasting more than a few weeks as a not-convenient-to-name brand receptionist, a barista at the local, not-convenient-to-name brand coffee shop, or even as a freelance dog walker. Each failure was accompanied by a litany of excuses. The manager was tyrannical, the shifts were impossible, or she simply had physical ailments that prevented her from working. Meanwhile, I liquidated the last of my meager retirement savings to cover the family's basic needs and, critically, Ethan's tuition at his small, expensive, not convenient-to-name brand private school. I managed the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. When Cora brought back fleeting acquaintances, men who often stayed overnight, left beer cans and cigarette butts on my beloved, not convenient-to-name brand porch furniture, I swallowed my intense disapproval and remained silent. My fear was simple. Rocking the boat would only exacerbate the storm. But even the most entrenched storms reach a breaking point. One afternoon, I picked Ethan up from school and was informed by his teacher that he had struck another student. This wasn't an isolated incident. The principal urgently suggested psychological therapy, positing that Ethan's behavior was a direct reaction to the instability and confusion in his home environment. My heart sank, heavy and cold. I knew with absolute certainty that they were right. That night, I sat Cora down, choosing my words with agonizing care. I explained that Ethan was exhibiting alarming signs of distress, that our current life structure was damaging him, and that immediate changes were necessary. I told her I was still committed to helping, but only if we implemented stringent rules and a clear, stable plan. Her face contorted into an ugly mask of rage. "You think you're superior to me?" she spat. "You've never even been a real mom. And look how Claire turned out, didn't she?" That deeply cruel, cutting attack on Claire was the final, irreversible blow. Yet, I maintained an unnatural calm. I reiterated that Ethan's well-being had to be our absolute priority, and that I was willing to continue providing support, but only with rules and structure. That is when she delivered the final, defining sentence of my life as her benefactor. "Stop giving your opinion. You don't get to tell me how to raise my son. I'm his mother." For a long, agonizing moment, everything inside me went utterly still. It wasn't the shock of the words, which I'd heard echoes of before, but the sudden, devastating clarity of realizing she meant it, that she truly saw me as nothing more than a bank account and an irritating voice. I stood up slowly, deliberately. I did not shout. I did not cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply said, "Okay." Cora laughed, a short, contemptuous sound. "Okay." I nodded, meeting her gaze steadily. "I won't say another word about how you raise Ethan, Cora, I promise. But starting right now, I am done funding your lifestyle. The tuition for Ethan's private school is ending this month. You have exactly 3 months to find a steady job, secure suitable housing for yourself and your son, and prepare to be fully financially responsible." She stared at me, her face pale with stunned disbelief. I had never seen her look so utterly helpless. "Are you serious, Grandma?" she scoffed, the word grandma laced with pure venom. "Dead serious, Cora," I replied, then turned and walked up the stairs to my room without another word. That night, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, I knew I had finally drawn the line I should have enforced over a decade ago. I was no longer angry. I was done. There is an enormous, life-altering difference between the two emotions. I knew the coming 3 months would be brutally difficult, but for the first time in 12 years, I was absolutely certain I would not be a doormat anymore. I had no idea that this single definitive decision would trigger the most calculated and devastating betrayal of my entire life. I expected fierce resistance from Cora, replacing Laura, following my ultimatum, but I did not anticipate her complete, almost surreal denial. The next morning, she acted as if our tense confrontation had never occurred. She made herself a strong cup of not convenient to name brand coffee, scrolled endlessly through social media on her phone, and offered me only the barest nod of acknowledgement. I sat across the antique, not convenient to name brand, kitchen table in absolute silence, observing her. I waited, not just for a reaction, but for some small indication that she had internalized the severity of my words. It never came. 3 days bled into a week, then into a second. There were no audible signs of job searching, no phone calls to prospective employers, no sounds of a printer running resumes. She maintained her routine of sleeping until well past noon, perpetually leaving a stack of sticky, dirty dishes in the sink, and spending hours consumed by messaging and whispering on her phone with the new acquaintance, Brant, replacing Brandon. I still hadn't physically met Brant, but the tone of her voice when she spoke to him, a mixture of excitement, dependency, and adoration I hadn't heard since she was a little girl, terrified me more than any open aggression. His voice, which occasionally drifted into the living room, was unnervingly smooth and overly polite, suggesting a calculated performance of kindness rather than genuine feeling. Cora seemed utterly captivated by him, and that was a dangerous vulnerability. Meanwhile, Ethan, replacing James, was becoming noticeably more irritable. He snapped frequently when asked to complete his homework and rolled his eyes when I addressed him. One afternoon, while cleaning the rarely used den, I found a disturbing drawing shoved deep under the edge of the sofa. It was a crude, dark sketch of a young boy sitting completely alone in a room, weeping silently. I stared at the image for a long time, recognizing the intense isolation depicted. I knew that feeling intimately. I had lived it most of my adult life following Claire's death and Cora's rejection. At the end of the second week, I offered a final, gentle reminder about the ticking clock. "Cora?" I said calmly, interrupting her viewing of a not convenient to name brand reality TV show. "I just wanted to check in. The clock is moving quickly." "I'm working on it, Grandma," she muttered dismissively, without looking up from her screen. "Have you submitted applications anywhere specific?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice neutral. She shot me a look of pure, cutting scorn, as if I had committed a gross offense. "Why are you always hounding me? I told you I'd figure it out." "You only have 10 weeks left, Cora. This is not a drill." She stood abruptly, slamming her glass onto the coffee table. "Jesus, you are such a control freak." I remained silent. There was simply no point in arguing. Experience had taught me that every word I uttered now would be immediately converted into ammunition to use against me later. So I shifted tactics. I began a methodical process of financial and emotional withdrawal. I canceled the automatic tuition payments to Ethan's private school. I stopped covering Cora's excessive, not convenient to name brand data phone plan. I stopped buying her specific, expensive snacks and drinks from the grocery store. These were small, seemingly trivial actions, but they carried immense symbolic weight. The fallout was predictably rapid and explosive. "You canceled my cell service?" she shrieked a week later, her face blotchy with fury. "Are you serious, Dot?" "I told you," I replied, standing my ground. "I am no longer funding your lifestyle." "How do you expect me to find a job without a phone?" she cried, her rage momentarily melting into self-pity. "I will provide a prepaid phone strictly for interview confirmations," I stated clearly. "Otherwise, you must use the house number. That is the new rule." She stormed off, slamming her bedroom door with such violence that a vintage photograph of Claire and me fell from the wall. That evening, I heard her muffled, pathetic crying from her room. For a brief, agonizing moment, my old maternal instinct flared. I felt the powerful urge to go to her, to comfort her, to offer a conditional surrender. I almost went. Almost. But I didn't. I held back, realizing that Ethan deserved better than a life defined by enabling, and more importantly, I deserved to keep my dignity intact. Brant, replacing Brandon, started visiting soon after. He was tall, impeccably groomed, and always wore a clean, pressed, not convenient to name brand button-down shirt, even on weekends. He was too polished, too deliberately careful. He insisted on calling me Miss Dot, which felt less like respect and more like a calculated performance of deference. His eyes, though, were unsettlingly cold, a sharp contrast to his unfaltering, charming smile. "It is a genuine pleasure to finally meet you," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was far too firm. "Cora has told me so much about your generosity." I nodded, maintaining intense eye contact. "Likewise," I replied, watching him closely. I often caught them whispering conspiratorially in dim corners, convinced I was deaf or asleep. Ethan, replacing James, visibly retreated whenever Brant was present, his small posture physically shrinking. One chilly night, I overheard a heated argument in the driveway. Brant's voice was low, hard, and utterly devoid of its usual smooth charm, and Cora's voice was trembling with fear. Later, she returned inside, her eyes red and puffy, but I upheld my promise. No opinions. I wanted to question her, to warn her, but I remained silent. I started locking my bedroom door with the deadbolt every night. As the weeks advanced, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier, thicker, like the walls were closing in. Cora wasn't actively searching for work. She wasn't even pretending. She was deliberately waiting me out, utterly convinced that my years of sacrifice meant I would eventually, inevitably, cave. But I didn't. Instead, I found a strange, unexpected peace in new routines. I began taking Ethan to the local, not convenient to name brand, park. I started a massive, cathartic cleaning project in the attic. Crucially, I began writing again. Little essays, detailed journal entries, fragments of poetry I hadn't touched since Claire's death. For the first time in over a decade, my life was defined by reclaiming and self-determination, not merely surviving. Then, with just 3 weeks remaining on my ultimatum, Cora's behavior shifted dramatically. She became a caricature of the perfect daughter. She woke up early, kept the kitchen spotless, made delicious pancakes, and apologized profusely for being distant. "I know I've been a total mess," she murmured one morning, her eyes glistening. But I want to fix things. I want to be better for Ethan and for you. I did not trust it completely, but the sudden, intense display of vulnerability tugged powerfully at my heart. The very next day, she sat beside me on the sofa and produced her phone. Brant's cousin owns a wonderful small place in new location, Costa Rica, a secluded little resort. He said we can go stay there for a few days. Just us. No stress, no pressure. I thought maybe we could take a trip together, reset things. I want you to see how serious I am about changing. I blinked, momentarily stunned. A trip? Yeah, just us two, Grandma. Like a real reset. Every rational instinct screamed no. But I saw something in her gaze, perhaps raw guilt, maybe intense desperation, that appealed directly to my deep-seated hope for reconciliation. I agreed hesitantly, promising to think it over. That night, I found her standing silently in the hallway, thinking I was asleep, weeping quietly. It was the first authentic glimpse I had seen in years of the little girl I had raised, the one who needed a nightlight and insisted on reading, not convenient to name brand, storybooks 3 times before bed. For a fatal moment, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, we could mend our fractured relationship. I didn't know yet that the trip wasn't a reset. It was the final, devastating setup. The days leading up to the trip were shrouded in an unnatural, disquieting calm. Cora, replacing Laura, maintained her performance flawlessly. She was up early, preparing light breakfasts before I even came downstairs. She showed meticulous attention to Ethan's, replacing James, homework, frequently asked me about my day, and performed household chores like folding laundry without being prompted. Periodically, she would pause mid-conversation and look at me with a profound intensity, as if genuinely attempting to grasp some long-lost connection from our shared past. I desperately wanted to believe in the sincerity of this sudden transformation. Brant, replacing Brandon, reduced his visits significantly during this period. Cora explained that he was diligently working on the final travel arrangements, coordinating logistics with his cousin for the secluded resort in Costa Rica, replacing Mexico. I remained quiet, highly observant, refusing to lower my emotional guard entirely, but the facade was unnervingly convincing, far too convincing. The morning we were scheduled to depart, Cora appeared genuinely nervous. She triple-checked our passports, compulsively repacked her small, not convenient to name brand, weekender bag twice, and repeatedly asked if I felt well, behaving as if she were walking on fragile eggshells while maintaining a forced smile. At the not convenient to name brand international airport, Brant was waiting by the check-in counter, ostensibly to bid us farewell. He embraced Cora for an uncomfortably long time and whispered something urgently into her ear, which she acknowledged with a quick nod, her eyes wide and anxious. He then turned to me, his cold eyes failing to meet mine, and said with unsettling formality, "Have a truly restorative time, Miss Dot. You certainly deserve it." The way he delivered the word deserve sent a visceral, unsettling chill down my spine. I didn't manage to sleep much during the entire flight. My body refused to relax, held captive by a nameless dread and a powerful, conflicting instinct. The so-called resort in Costa Rica was far from the bustling, vibrant destination I had mentally pictured. It was a property identified only as El Descanso, the rest, quiet and eerily tranquil, shielded behind imposing stucco walls and a heavy, elaborate wrought iron gate. It was the kind of place that appeared serene from a distance, yet felt intensely empty and overly still upon closer inspection. The minimal staff greeted us in fluent Spanish and halting English, their smiles overly enthusiastic and strangely taut. I attempted to dismiss the burgeoning discomfort, convincing myself I was merely paranoid, that 12 years of emotional vigilance had made me suspicious of any moment that resembled peace. "We can finally relax here, Grandma," Cora insisted, her voice light and brittle. "Completely disconnect. Zero stress." She wasn't wrong about the disconnect. Immediately upon arrival, they requested that we surrender our phones, citing limited mountain reception and mandatory guest safety protocols. I hesitated profoundly, but Cora quickly reassured me she had specifically requested this policy. "So, we're not tempted to check our emails or get distracted," she explained. It felt profoundly wrong, yet I reluctantly complied. Later that first evening, I requested permission to take a brief walk outside the compound's perimeter to stretch my legs. "For your safety, Senora," the man at the front desk responded smoothly, his smile failing to reach his eyes. "That is not permitted." Cora immediately intervened, brushing off my concern. "Just their rules, Dot. Probably due to local petty crime or wildlife activity. By the second morning, they asked me to attend what they termed a wellness and orientation consultation. I assumed it was a standard part of the mandatory retreat experience. When I arrived at the consultation room, the woman behind the desk produced a manila file with my full name, Dorothy Campbell, starkly printed on the tab. That was the first absolute, unarguable red flag. Inside the folder, I found my actual birth certificate, numerous medical records I had absolutely no memory of, and a deeply alarming signed form, allegedly bearing my signature, requesting voluntary admittance for intensive psychological care and treatment. I stared at the document, a suffocating realization seizing my breath. "This signature is not mine," I stated, my voice coming out cold and unnaturally controlled. The woman looked at me, completely unfazed. "You've been under considerable stress, Miss Dot. Sometimes significant memory lapses are a common side effect of profound distress." I immediately stood, attempting to flee, but the door was already shut, secured with an internal deadbolt. I was locked in. That night, they moved me to a different room. It was smaller, starkly furnished, featuring heavy steel bars across the single window, and a uniformed nurse positioned silently outside the bolted door. I did not see Cora again. The following days blurred into a suffocating, drug-induced haze. They systematically drugged me, not heavily enough to render me unconscious, but sufficient to maintain a state of perpetual disorientation and imbalance. I quickly learned to play their game. I would pretend to swallow the sedatives, carefully concealing the pills in the corner of my cheek or under my tongue. I adopted a groggy, cooperative facade, smiling when they watched me and maintaining silence when they posed questions. But internally, my mind was functioning with sharp, desperate clarity. They persistently informed me that I was deeply confused, that I had been suffering from elaborate delusions and paranoia, and that I had voluntarily signed all the necessary legal documents in the U.S. before traveling. They showed me photocopies of signatures that bore a horrifying resemblance to my own, repeatedly referencing past, not convenient to name brand episodes of memory impairment and anxiety. I grasped the full, horrifying reality of their plan. They weren't attempting to help me. They were systematically attempting to erase me. Back home, I still possessed significant assets. The house where I had raised 3 generations, my remaining retirement investments, and a small, valuable investment account that Claire had left in my name. All of it could be legally accessed via a power of attorney, POA. If I were officially declared mentally unfit and confined internationally. All Brant and Cora needed was the right paperwork and one last fraudulent signature. This profound realization broke me, but not in the way they had planned. It didn't diminish my will. It ignited it into a cold, terrifying flame. I decided to bide my time. I played their absurd game for days, maybe weeks. The distinction was lost in the fog. Following the institutional schedule, attending their mandatory group sessions, and smiling when required. Then, one solitary afternoon, while confined to the tiny, severely restricted institutional library, I found my lifeline, an ancient, barely functional computer with restricted internet access. I requested permission to use it, claiming I needed to write a personal journal to aid my recovery. The nurse, barely glancing up from her magazine, nodded indifferently. That is how I made contact. Not with a lawyer or a designated emergency service, but with Donna Yates, keeping original name, a former coworker from my highly structured days as a regional manager. Donna was the single person I trusted implicitly to take immediate action. I used coded language, referenced a niche, shared office joke we hadn't repeated in 2 decades, and dropped just enough strategic clues for her to instantly understand the terrifying gravity of my situation. It took several agonizing days, but Donna received the message, and she did not hesitate. The day the American consulate representatives arrived at El Descanso, requesting a private interview with me, I knew my time in this living hell was drawing to a close. The staff fought them desperately, attempting to delay, fabricating excuses that I was not lucid enough to receive visitors. But Donna had already provided the consulate with all the necessary external documentation. The embassy intervened immediately. Slowly, meticulously, they extracted me from that horrifying place. As the car pulled away, leaving the stucco walls and high iron gate behind, I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply looked out the window and whispered, "You thought I would vanish, but I wasn't gone. Not yet. And now I'm coming home." Coming home was not the relief I had desperately anticipated. When the wheels of the commercial flight finally hit the tarmac in the United States, I expected an overwhelming sense of peace, as if I had merely crossed a finish line and successfully left the entire terrifying ordeal behind me. But that is never how trauma works. You carry it physically, in the sharp ache of your spine, the hollow pit in your stomach, the shaky rhythm of your breath. It walks beside you like a heavy, unwelcome second shadow. The customs agent barely glanced at me as he processed my passport. I didn't blame him. I was significantly thinner. My skin was pale and sallow from weeks of confinement and low-grade drugging, and my hands trembled visibly when I reached for my documents. My hair, which I had always diligently maintained, showed far more gray than before. The address I returned to was devastatingly no longer legally mine. Donna, keeping original name, had meticulously arranged for me to be met by an attorney she completely trusted, Mr. Evan Doyle, replacing lawyer's name. He handed me a thick, unsettling envelope filled with official documents, his eyes betraying a soft, professional pity that stung worse than anger. "Miss Campbell," he said quietly, choosing his words with professional care. "I need to prepare you." Cora, replacing Laura, and Brant, replacing Brandon, accomplished a great deal in a remarkably short amount of time. I nodded, even though I was far from ready to absorb the sheer magnitude of their calculated betrayal. The details unfolded like a meticulous, cruel financial report. My primary bank account, including the last vestiges of my retirement savings, had been drained completely. My house, the cherished Victorian I had sacrificed so much to maintain, the place where I had raised Claire, keeping original name, then Cora, and then Ethan, replacing James, had been sold and legally transferred. My car was gone, listed as a private sale. Every single transaction had been executed under a forged power of attorney, POA, that Brandt and Cora had filed with a complacent notary utilizing my driver's license, which they had deliberately stolen from my purse the moment we arrived at the isolated resort in Costa Rica. They even liquidated and sold a significant amount of your antique furniture, Mr. Doyle added carefully, sensing my profound shock. I didn't speak for a long time. I just stared blindly out the lawyer's car window, watching the familiar, bustling city of new location Phoenix, Arizona, rush by. Finally, I asked him to take me somewhere completely quiet. He drove me to a local women's shelter downtown. Not because I had no other options, Donna had already generously offered her guest room, but because I needed absolute silence and anonymity. I needed a space where I could finally confront the devastation without the performance of polite strength. I had not allowed myself to truly feel anger. In Costa Rica, my entire being had been dedicated solely to survival and maintaining lucidity. Now, lying on a small, uncomfortable cot in that tiny, sterile room with a perpetually stained ceiling fan, I finally released the floodgates. I cried for Claire, the daughter I couldn't save. I cried for Ethan, the innocent child caught in the toxic crossfire. And then I cried for myself. Not because I was financially ruined, but because every single thing I had sacrificed, every compromise, every financial extension I had made to keep Cora afloat and shield her from the consequences of the real world, had been weaponized against me with cold, ruthless efficiency. I spent 3 days in that shelter, moving between phases of profound grief and intense, crystallizing rage. It was a crucible of pain that transformed me. On the third evening, Donna arrived. She brought new, anonymous clothes, a powerful laptop, and a secure, untraceable burner phone. "It's time to fight, Dot," she said simply, her expression grim but resolute. I nodded, the grief replaced by a cold, burning focus. The first critical step was hiring a highly specialized forensic document analyst. Within days, the analyst confirmed every suspicion we held. The signatures on the power of attorney were undisputable forgeries. The medical records used to justify my international confinement were a calculated fabrication, some details maliciously pulled from legitimate, old medical history, others completely falsified to paint a portrait of severe mental instability. Crucially, the notary who witnessed the fraudulent documents was already under investigation by the state for prior criminal activity. Brandt and Cora had successfully constructed an entire, chilling legal illusion, and it had come terrifyingly close to succeeding. We immediately filed a multifaceted lawsuit. This was not merely a civil attempt to reclaim assets. We filed criminal charges: felony financial fraud, severe financial abuse of an elder, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit unlawful confinement and kidnapping. When the not-convenient-to-name Brand Police Department showed up at the upscale apartment Cora and Brandt were renting, paid for, no doubt, with my stolen funds, they didn't even attempt to deny the charges. Brandt was arrested first. Predictably, he cracked instantly under professional interrogation, desperately attempting to shift all the blame onto Cora, claiming that the entire elaborate scheme had been her idea, and that he had merely handled the logistics. However, the evidence, a meticulously preserved trail of his emails, wire transfer records, and voice messages, proved otherwise. He had been the calculated, cold orchestrator. Cora was arrested the following day outside a not-convenient-to-name brand nail salon. When the officer formally read her Miranda rights, she didn't collapse into tears or protest her innocence. She simply looked profoundly annoyed, as if I were the one who had committed the ultimate betrayal by disrupting her manicure appointment. The ensuing trial was mercifully swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Meticulously traced wire transfers, the notarized lies, and highly damaging voice recordings that Donna had shrewdly helped me recover from old voicemails Cora had left on my home line. They were both convicted not just for the devastating financial crimes, but for unlawful confinement. The fact that I had been held against my will in a foreign country added immense weight to the final sentencing. Cora was sentenced to 6 years in a state correctional facility, with a possibility of parole after 4. Brant received 8 years due to his role as the orchestrator of the financial logistics. And Ethan? Ethan had been placed with a highly vetted temporary foster family while the case unfolded. I was strictly barred from any contact until the court meticulously reviewed the entire case, my complete medical history, and definitively determined I was mentally and emotionally stable and fit to resume my role as his primary guardian. I will never forget the day I stood before the judge, my hands trembling slightly, and asked the court to reinstate me as the legal guardian of Ethan, replacing James. It was the most important day of my reclaimed life. The judge, an older woman with a weary but sharp gaze, listened patiently as the court reviewed my extensive documentation. I hadn't come unprepared. I brought a meticulously organized presentation. Old, positive report cards, cherished photographs spanning every year of his life, notes from his former teachers detailing my involvement, and letters he had written to me as a little boy. I even brought the slightly threadbare, stuffed, not convenient to name brand bear he had slept with until the age of 7. Your Honor, I testified, my voice firm despite the profound emotion, I don't seek to replace his mother. That is an impossible task. But I want to give him something she could not: safety, stability, and a love that does not come with a hidden price tag. The entire, arduous legal process was reviewed thoroughly, and that afternoon, the judge granted me full, permanent custody. Just like that, I was a mother again, a grandmother and a legal guardian. But fundamentally, the primary, essential figure in a small, vulnerable life. Ethan was quiet when he was returned to my care. He didn't ask a flurry of questions or launch into a detailed account of his time in foster care. He simply hugged me, hard, long, and without letting go, and whispered, "I missed you, Grandma Dot." I held him tightly, refusing to let go for a very long time, feeling the fragile connection between us mend itself in that single, silent embrace. We started our new life immediately in a smaller house in a completely different part of Phoenix. The house I had sacrificed everything for was gone, a painful casualty of the betrayal. I bought modest, secondhand furniture, learned to clip coupons with the vigilance I hadn't needed in decades, and meticulously stretched every dollar. The lack of luxury didn't matter. I had him. Every morning, Ethan would sit across from me at the kitchen table, a second-hand table but solid and clean, his eyes clear, smiling through a mouthful of cereal. Every night, I would tuck him into bed, whispering the same comforting words I had once whispered to Claire years ago. "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe." But safety, I understood now with absolute clarity, didn't originate from sophisticated locks or external alarm systems. It originated from truth, from choosing the quiet resilience of peace over the consuming terror of fear, and from never, ever allowing someone to convince you that love must cost your dignity. I was just beginning the long, slow process of reclaiming my own. The new house was a single-story rental with cracked stucco and a perpetually crooked mailbox, but it was ours. And after the devastating exile and the harrowing trial, that distinction was everything. In the tiny backyard, there was a struggling, not convenient to name brand lemon tree that oddly reminded me of the sun-drenched gardens of my childhood. During the first week, Ethan and I picked the few lemons it had managed to produce and laboriously made lemonade from scratch. It was far too sour, but he drank it enthusiastically, declaring it tasted like sunshine. I remember laughing, a genuine, unrestrained laugh, for the first time in what felt like years. Still, I couldn't completely relax my guard. I watched everything. Every shift in Ethan's behavior, every flicker of fear in his eyes. He had endured a trauma far beyond his years, more complex than he could articulate. One night, I found him standing silently in the hallway, wide-eyed, clutching the old blanket he had used as a toddler. When I gently asked what was wrong, he whispered, "Is Brant going to come back?" I immediately dropped to my knees, pulled him close, and held him tightly. "No, darling, he's gone. He's not coming back. No one is going to hurt us anymore." He nodded, but his silence still felt heavy. The next day, I enrolled him in a new local public school. We simply couldn't afford the private tuition anymore, but I specifically chose a campus known for its kind staff and excellent counselor. I met with his teacher personally, explaining the basics of his recent trauma and requesting extra support. "You are doing an amazing thing, Miss Dot," she told me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. I wanted to believe her. But there were still persistent days when I looked into the mirror and saw only failure. A woman who couldn't save her own daughter, who had raised a granddaughter who betrayed her, and who now had to painfully rebuild her entire life from mere dust and agonizing memory. I began journaling every single night, a habit I had picked up while locked in the tiny library in Costa Rica. It was my only way to organize the overwhelming emotional mess and to physically remind myself, I am still here. Then, one quiet morning, something happened that deeply shook me. I was meticulously cleaning out the last of the old boxes from my storage unit, the few possessions Donna had managed to salvage before Cora and Brant sold off the rest. There, at the bottom, I found a sealed, yellowed envelope addressed in Claire's distinct handwriting. I stared at the envelope for a full 10 minutes before I could bring myself to open it. The paper inside was creased in 4 neat folds, floral stationery I had given her for her 21st birthday. It wasn't a long letter, but its contents were enough to completely break me open again. She had written it just a few months before her death and had never mailed it. In it, she confessed the painful truth. Cora hadn't been planned. More devastatingly, she admitted she had seriously considered giving Cora up, feeling overwhelmed and profoundly unsure of what kind of mother she could ever be. "I was never strong like you, Mom," she wrote. And Cora knows. She feels that distance. I see it in her eyes and I don't know how to fix it. She concluded by saying, she always knew I would step in if something happened, that I was already more of a mother to Cora than she had ever been. "I just hope one day she sees that," the letter ended. I folded the letter carefully and held it tightly against my chest. It didn't make the betrayal easier to bear, but it gave the pain a new, complex shape. Claire, the daughter who always seemed to pull away from me, had still known how deeply I loved her. And Cora? She had inherited more than just Claire's pale eyes. She had inherited her mother's confusion, her pain, and the tragic legacy of women who never truly learned how to receive love without simultaneously needing to destroy it. Perhaps, I finally thought, that was my failure. Perhaps I had tried too hard to be everything, leaving no room for her to become herself. That night, I placed the letter in the drawer beside my bed. I wouldn't show it to Ethan yet. He was doing better. He was drawing again, talking more, asking questions like, "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" "She loved you in the way she knew how," I told him honestly. "But sometimes people have their own pain that gets in the way. It doesn't mean it was your fault." It never was. He nodded slowly, and I watched something in his shoulders soften. We were healing slowly, like old wounds learning not to ache with the changing weather. But part of me still couldn't let go of the anger. Cora was still in prison. I hadn't written to her. I hadn't answered the one letter she sent. An apology full of vague, rehearsed remorse, and a request for updates on Ethan. I kept that letter too in the same drawer. I knew one day I would have to face her, or face the question of forgiveness. But for now, I had survived. I had survived exile, and I had walked through the fire, not with blind rage, but with cold, quiet resolve. Time passed in strange, inconsistent ways after the trial and the successful return of Ethan, replacing James. Some weeks felt like an overwhelming blur of small domestic tasks, preparing school lunches, navigating therapy sessions for Ethan, and meticulously managing the grocery lists. Other weeks stretched on endlessly, especially when the profound silence in our small rental house served as a constant, heavy reminder of everything we had irrevocably lost. Ethan adjusted to the massive upheaval faster than I, Dorothy Campbell, replacing Edith, had anticipated. Children possess a resilience that adults rarely retain. He began making new friends. His laughter was more frequent, and his teachers at the new public school sent home encouraging notes praising his remarkable progress. Yet, I still frequently caught him staring blankly out the window, his lips pressed tightly together, as if trying to recall a painful memory without uttering the words aloud. He didn't ask much about Cora, replacing Laura, after the initial wave of anxious questions subsided. He seemed to accept, with the quiet pragmatism of a child, that it was just the two of us now. I, on the other hand, found it impossible to stop thinking about her every day. She was now incarcerated in the not convenient to name brand correctional facility in another state, and I was constantly torn between a sense of uncomfortable relief and an underlying pervasive shame. There were persistent, brief, unsettling moments when I would open the drawer where I kept Claire's keeping original name letter and Cora's solitary correspondence, and I would sit there, fingers hovering over the paper, wondering how 3 generations of women in my family had managed to fail each other in such specific, profoundly painful ways. One chilly afternoon, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across our cheap rental carpet, the telephone rang. I froze instantly. It was the distinct, formal voice of a prison operator. "This is a collect call from the not convenient to name brand correctional facility in Phoenix. Will you accept the charges?" I stared at the receiver, immobilized by shock and conflicting emotions. Ethan was upstairs, engrossed in a not convenient to name brand video game. I slowly and deliberately said, "Yes." Cora's voice, thin and brittle, cracked the instant she spoke. "Grandma?" I didn't answer immediately. I could hear the faint echo of her breath, and in my mind, I could instantly picture her in a sterile, gray visitation room, her hand gripping the hard plastic receiver. I know I'm the last person in the world you want to hear from, she continued quickly, her voice thick with desperation. But please, I just wanted to know how Ethan is. I think about him every single day. I remained silent, allowing her words to hang in the air between us. I know I don't deserve anything from you, she confessed, her voice lowering slightly. But I needed to call. I needed to tell you I'm truly sorry. There was that apology again. Careful, measured, and full of complex remorse. It didn't sound completely rehearsed, but neither did it feel entirely whole. You didn't just hurt me, Cora, I said quietly, finally breaking the silence. You tried to systematically erase me from existence. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I was desperate. I was incredibly stupid. Brant, replacing Brandon, made the plan sound so easy, like no one would be truly hurt. I let out a short, hollow, bitter laugh. You honestly believed that? No, she admitted, the word a ragged exhale. But I wanted to believe it. The line went silent for a prolonged moment, filled only with the faint static of the connection. I didn't know how to be a mother, she finally said, the confession raw and unexpected. I barely knew how to be a fully functioning person, and I hated that you were always better at it than me. I resented your competence. There it was. The truth I had waited for years to hear. Not a flimsy justification, but the stark articulation of her deep-seated pain and resentment. I'm not calling to ask for your forgiveness, Grandma, she insisted. I just desperately needed to hear your voice, that's all. I needed to know what I gave up. I decided not to tell her that I possessed Claire's letter, that her mother had written nearly the same words years before her death, that this agonizing cycle of fear, abandonment, and profound resentment had been looping through our family long before Cora ever picked up a pen, or Brant ever whispered his poisonous ideas into her desperate ear. Instead, I offered only the essential information. Ethan is safe. He is happy. He is okay. She began to weep then, soft, muffled sobs over the phone line. I remained silent, offering neither comfort nor accusation. I'll write, if that's acceptable, she finally managed to choke out. I'll read it, I replied, carefully weighing my words. No promises beyond that. When the call ended, I stood frozen in the kitchen for a long time, the heavy silence of the house pressing in around me. Later that night, I sat with Ethan on the couch, watching a not convenient to name brand movie playing softly in the background. He leaned against me, his head resting securely on my shoulder, and I ran my fingers through his hair, just as I had when he was a baby. He didn't know about the call. Not yet. But I knew that one day, when he was older and ready, I would have to tell him the complete truth. All of it. He deserved that transparency. We were meticulously building something new together, something rooted in absolute honesty and unwavering trust. I was not going to allow the ghosts of our past to haunt us into silence again. The very next day, I pulled out a fresh, blank notebook and began writing everything down. My story, Claire's story, and Cora's story. Not for public pity, and certainly not for continued revenge, but primarily for Ethan. I wanted him to know exactly who we were, how we had failed each other, and, most importantly, precisely how we had survived. The first correspondence arrived 2 weeks following the tumultuous phone call. It was postmarked from the Women's Correctional Facility, enclosed in a plain institutional envelope with slightly smudged ink. I, Dorothy Campbell, replacing Edith, sat staring at the letter for hours before finally breaking the seal. My fingers hovered over the edge, feeling as though the paper might burn me. Inside, Cora's, replacing Laura, handwriting was hurried, as if her thoughts were rushing out faster than the pen could manage. There was no formal greeting, no "dear grandma," only the raw beginning of something she had probably never dared to articulate to anyone. "I've been having the same dream every night," she wrote. "Ethan, replacing James, is standing on a porch, and I'm calling out to him, but he won't come to me. He just looks right past me like I'm completely invisible. And then you walk out behind him, and he runs straight into your arms. That's when I wake up." She proceeded to describe the physical realities of prison, the ceaseless noise, the piercing cold, and the pervasive institutional grayness of everything. She offered no complaints or direct pleas. Instead, she wrote about a fellow inmate who had permanently lost custody of her 3 children. "They say the forgetting gets easier over time," Cora wrote. "But I don't want to forget. I deserve to remember what I did." At the close of the letter, she made a singular, profound request. She asked me to tell Ethan that she loved him. Nothing more. I folded the letter deliberately and placed it back into the drawer with Claire's, keeping original name, delicate stationery. That evening, Ethan and I were baking, not convenient to name brand cookies. He wanted to prepare a surprise for his teacher's upcoming birthday. He cracked the eggs with the dexterity of a seasoned baker and dusted flour onto my nose when I wasn't looking. "Grandma?" he asked, licking the raw dough from his finger. "Do you think Mom is okay?" I paused, watching him intently. "I think she is actively trying to be okay," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And sometimes, Ethan, that is the absolute most anyone can do." He nodded and returned to decorating. I continually wrestled with how much to disclose. What was too much information for a child to bear? What was not enough to satisfy his intelligent curiosity? He was 12 now, sharp and deeply intuitive. I could sense the gears turning in his head when certain topics were deliberately left unspoken. Therefore, I never lied, but I withheld the full, painful context. Not yet. That weekend, I retrieved an old box from the attic, one of the few personal effects that had survived Cora's systematic purge of my belongings. It was a box filled with early mementos of both Claire and Cora, faded photographs, a handmade bracelet from summer camp, and old student journals. I dusted the box off and placed it on the dining table, and Ethan and I started carefully sifting through the memories. He paused, staring at an old photograph, likely from when Cora was 16. She was standing next to me, both of us beaming, holding a certificate from a local arts competition. "I don't remember this picture," Ethan observed. "I took it right after she won second place," I replied. "I was incredibly proud of her talent." "She looks happy," he murmured thoughtfully. "She was happy then," I confirmed, refusing to sugarcoat the past. "Life happened, Ethan, and sometimes profound pain alters people in profoundly negative ways." We spent the entire afternoon constructing a new digital photo album from those old snapshots, titling it "Memories Before Things Got Messy." It felt like a shared restorative therapy session. By viewing those former moments of joy, we were not denying the current pain, but acknowledging that happiness had undeniably existed. Then, a week later, the second letter from Cora arrived. This one was notably longer, scrawled across prison-issue-lined paper. She described the automotive repair apprenticeship program she was now diligently pursuing within the facility, stating it was the first time she had felt genuinely capable of something useful. She made no mention of Brant, replacing Brandon. But the detail that struck me most profoundly was a small personal anecdote she recounted from her childhood. I remember the time I accidentally shattered your not convenient to name brand porcelain vase on the mantelpiece. You didn't yell. You just calmly told me that anything important could be fixed. I never truly believed that until now, when I'm desperately trying to fix myself. The specific detail about the vase was potent. It was personal, authentic, a preserved memory that only Cora and I shared. It wasn't an apology, but a deeper acknowledgement of our history and the immense effort I had poured into her. I wrote back. This action was a genuine surprise even to myself, yet I felt a compelling obligation to do so. I didn't write about forgiveness. I wrote strictly about Ethan. He is doing well. He baked cookies for his teacher. He misses you, Cora. I kept the letter short, deliberately objective, framing it as a clinical status update. I expressed no emotion, offered no promises for the future, only stark, necessary truth. I sealed and stamped the envelope. It was the first time I had ever proactively sent a message to her place of confinement. My measured response instantly cracked open a new channel of limited communication. Cora's letters began arriving weekly. She never once inquired about financial matters or prospects of early parole. Instead, she asked about trivial, intimate domestic details. What was Ethan's new favorite meal? Had the struggling lemon tree in the yard finally produced fruit? These small, focused details helped me realize that, despite the horrific betrayal, her core maternal instinct remained buried somewhere beneath layers of profound trauma and resentment. I began to understand that my decision to write to Cora was not fundamentally about her salvation. It was about Ethan's salvation, saving him from the corrosive burden of silence and enduring uncertainty. If Ethan could observe that I was still, however coldly and formally, communicating with his mother, he would learn that the world is not simply black and white, and that the people he loved, even those who had grievously hurt us, remained a complex part of the continuous narrative. That was how we began writing Part 7 of our story, not with further retribution, but with a period of quiet resolution and an unwavering commitment to seek and share the truth. We were slowly, painstakingly healing, like old broken bones that ache with every change in the weather, but are structurally sound. Ethan, replacing James, was thriving in his new environment. He found a passion for the school's robotics club. His grades were excellent, and the school counselor confirmed that his anxiety levels had dropped dramatically since our move. He was a resilient, bright light that made every sacrifice I, Dorothy Campbell, replacing Edith, had made feel worthwhile. Still, the quiet part of my life, the emotional reckoning, could not be avoided. My nightly journaling ritual, born in the confines of the Costa Rican facility, had become the anchor of my emotional stability. I wrote about the past, not to relive it, but to systematically categorize and understand it. I was trying to map the failure points of 3 generations. One night, the weight of Claire's, keeping original name, unsent letter became too heavy to bear in silence. I reread it, focusing on her line. I was never strong like you, Mom. I realized that perhaps I hadn't just enabled Cora, replacing Laura. Perhaps I had accidentally intimidated Claire. My constant capability, my unwavering strength and self-reliance might have left no emotional space for my daughter to struggle, to fail, and to simply be human. And Cora? She had inherited more than just her mother's looks. She had inherited her mother's confusion and the specific pain of feeling chronically inadequate in the shadow of a grandmother who was always perceived as better or stronger. I knew that this painful generational cycle of abandonment and resentment had to stop with me. I wasn't just healing for myself, I was healing for Ethan. A breakthrough came one rainy Saturday. Ethan and I were cleaning the garage, and he uncovered a dusty old briefcase belonging to Claire. Inside, amongst some outdated, not convenient to name brand brochures, we found an early draft of her will, a document written years before she died, which she had clearly never executed. In that draft, she had explicitly asked me, Dorothy Campbell, to become the permanent legal guardian of Cora in the event of her death. It wasn't just an expectation, it was a formal, documented request. The document wasn't legally binding, but it was an emotional confirmation of what I had always suspected. Claire had trusted me implicitly, knowing I was the only person capable of providing the stable love she herself couldn't sustain. I showed the document to Ethan. "Your mom knew, honey," I said, holding his gaze. "She knew that if anything happened, I would be here for you and for Cora. That was her last, most important decision." He simply held the paper, his fingers tracing his mother's distinct handwriting. He didn't ask why Cora betrayed me. He didn't ask why she sold the house. He only asked, "Did she tell Mom I was safe before she went to prison?" "Yes," I replied, a small lie for a greater truth. "I made sure she knew you were safe and happy." His shoulders visibly relaxed, shedding a weight he had carried for too long. He was seeking permission to release his mother from the pedestal of his idealization, and I had just given it to him. The letters from Cora continued to arrive. They were now filled with slightly more detail about her life inside. She described her work on a broken-down prison vehicle, a not-convenient-to-name brand pickup truck, which she was patiently restoring. She was slowly, physically, demonstrating the self-sufficiency I had always begged her to embrace. In one letter, she finally addressed Brandt directly. She wrote that she hadn't seen him since their transfer to different facilities, and that she never wanted to see him again. She admitted that he had fed her entitlement, telling her exactly what she wanted to hear. That she deserved the money, that I was an obstacle, and that their plan was flawless. "He was like a parasite, Grandma," she wrote. "He lived off my weakness. But my weakness was already there, waiting for him." This admission was the closest she had come to genuine accountability. My own responses remained short and factual, focused entirely on Ethan's milestones, his progress in robotics, the funny thing his teacher said, and his latest drawing, a detailed architectural sketch of a fantasy treehouse, a far cry from the solitary crying boy. I was maintaining the distance, not out of malice, but for self-preservation. I needed to ensure that my boundaries were made of steel this time. But the question of why I was still doing this, why I was expending this emotional energy on the daughter who tried to destroy me, lingered. I found the answer one afternoon while working in the garden, pruning the lemon tree. The tree was finally flourishing, heavy with pale green fruit. My motivation wasn't about forgiveness for Cora. It was about completion. I needed to close the loop for Ethan. He needed to know that the woman who bore him was not entirely evil, just profoundly lost. He needed the whole story, the love, the betrayal, the consequences, and the small, difficult steps toward redemption, so that he could break the generational cycle. I began compiling the full history in my journal. The details of the POA forgery, the names of the lawyers, the day I landed in Phoenix homeless. I was writing his inheritance, not of money, but of truth. I knew that one day, when he was ready, I would present him with the complete account, including Claire's letter and Cora's prison confessions. This was my final act of motherhood, giving him the tools to understand his family's complex legacy, ensuring he would never have to search for the answers in silence as I had. I was done with secrets and done with enabling. I was ready to use the truth to set him, and finally myself, free. Time, after the sentencing and my return, stretched out in strange, unequal segments. Some weeks were a demanding scramble of activity: school drop-offs, parent meetings, and the constant balancing act of our modest budget. Others were marked by an almost suffocating quiet, especially when the small rental house felt too large for just 2 people. Ethan, replacing James, was adjusting with a speed and grace that was a testament to his innate resilience. Children, I observed, are often forced to be pragmatic survivors in ways adults often fail to be. He had completely submerged himself in his robotics club and his new social circle. His teachers sent home notes praising his improved focus, yet I still occasionally saw him staring thoughtfully into the distance, his mouth set in a firm, silent line, as if trying to grasp a memory just beyond his reach. He rarely initiated conversation about Cora, replacing Laura now. He had, with quiet acceptance, moved past the initial barrage of questions and seemed content with the fact that it was just me, Dorothy Campbell, replacing Edith, and him. I, however, found my mind circling back to her constantly. She was still incarcerated, and the thought brought a complicated mix of relief that the threat was neutralized and a profound, personal sadness for the waste of a life. I would often open the drawer containing Claire's, keeping original name letter, and Cora's recent correspondence, contemplating the failure that linked us. Then, one quiet Tuesday afternoon, the phone shattered the domestic peace. It was the operator's formal, sterile voice. "This is a collect call from the not convenient to name brand correctional facility in a distant state. Will you accept the charges?" I froze, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Ethan was upstairs, absorbed in building a complex, not convenient to name brand, model kit. I stared at the cheap telephone receiver, the silence stretching agonizingly, until the operator repeated the question. I finally whispered, "Yes." Cora's voice, faint and laced with the static of the correctional facility, was barely recognizable as she spoke my name. "Grandma?" I didn't reply immediately. I could vividly hear the strained silence and the subtle background noises of the institutional environment. I could picture her, isolated in a small, stark room, her grip tight on the plastic phone. "I know you don't want to hear from me," she began, her voice cracking with the effort of control. "But please, I had to call. I needed to know how Ethan is doing. I think about him every single second." I remained utterly silent, allowing her carefully chosen words to resonate in the empty space between us. "I know I destroyed your trust," she pressed on. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I needed to call just to say, I'm deeply sorry. For everything." There was that apology again, formal, deliberate, but this time, it sounded slightly more authentic, less like a rehearsed performance for a parole board. "You attempted to erase my entire identity, Cora," I stated, my voice low and steady. "That goes far beyond mere betrayal." "I know," she whispered, the admission a painful sigh. I was desperate and delusional. Brant, replacing Brandon, made the financial scheme sound so logical, so easy, like an unavoidable solution. I wanted to believe that the money was owed to me, that it wouldn't hurt you. I emitted a short, sharp, cynical exhale. You truly believed that lie? No, she confessed, the word a sudden surrender. But I craved the relief that believing it offered. The line was silent for a prolonged minute. I realized something here, Grandma. I never learned how to be a mother because I never learned how to be a person first. I just hated that you were capable of everything I wasn't. This was the rawest truth yet, the emotional core of her lifelong resentment. I'm not calling to petition for forgiveness, she clarified. I just needed to hear your voice, to know you were real, and that I hadn't truly destroyed everything. I chose my response with deliberate care. I was not offering comfort, only verifiable facts. Ethan is completely safe. He is happy. He is excelling in school and is well-adjusted. She began to weep then, the sound muffled and fragile. I offered no words of solace, simply holding the line until the sobs subsided. I'll write again, if you allow it, she asked, her voice raw. I will read it, I confirmed, setting the boundary firmly in place. No further promises. When the call was abruptly disconnected, I stood motionless in the quiet kitchen for what felt like an eternity. Later that evening, I sat with Ethan on the sofa, the television volume low, my arm securely around his shoulders. He didn't know about the call. Not yet. But I knew that one day, when he was older and capable of processing the heavy reality, I would have to tell him the complete, unvarnished truth. He deserved that clarity. We were meticulously building a foundation of honesty, and I would not allow the dark, manipulative secrets of the past to silence us again. The very next morning, I carefully pulled out my comprehensive notebook, the one filled with my meticulous coded journal entries, and began transferring the narrative into a final, detailed document. The story of my survival, Claire's tragic story, and Cora's complex betrayal. This document was my gift, my inheritance for Ethan. One day, when he was old enough to ask the inevitable, difficult questions, he wouldn't have to navigate conjecture or shame. He would know exactly who we were and how we had endured. The first letter following the prison phone call arrived 2 weeks later, thicker and heavier than the previous ones. It was postmarked from the not convenient to name brand, correctional facility, the paper thin and cheap. I, Dorothy Campbell, replacing Edith, carried it around the house for an entire day before I could bring myself to open it. I felt the weight of it, not just paper and ink, but years of unaddressed dysfunction and pain. This time, Cora, replacing Laura, didn't focus on her own misery. Instead, she wrote about the small steps of redemption she was taking. She detailed the automotive repair certification she had earned and the satisfaction of physically fixing a malfunctioning prison generator, a machine that, like her, had been broken and forgotten. I'm learning that fixing things requires tools and patience, not just tears, she wrote. I finally understand why you never rushed to help me, Grandma. You were trying to teach me to build my own foundation. She then included a deeply personal passage. I've been reading a book about attachment theory. It talks about how people who feel abandoned often push away the love they crave. I realize now that I didn't hate you. I hated that I needed you so desperately, and I was terrified that my need would eventually make you leave, just like Claire did. This was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle, the acknowledgement of her deep-seated fear of abandonment, stemming from her mother's unpredictable love and early death, projected onto me. I decided my next action would be decisive and final. I didn't write back. Instead, I drove to the local court and filed the final voluminous document that I had spent months compiling, the detailed narrative of the betrayal, the criminal proceedings, and my meticulous record of Ethan's replacing James' healing. This was the document that fully substantiated my continued permanent guardianship. That evening, I sat Ethan down at the small kitchen table. He was 12, on the cusp of understanding adult complexities. "Honey," I started, placing the thick, bound journal I had written on the table, "Grandma is giving you an inheritance tonight. It's not money, because your mother and Brant took that. This is something much more valuable." I explained that the journal contained the complete, unedited story of our family. I told him about Claire's struggles, about Cora's pain and deep fear of being alone, about the betrayal, and about my fight to get him back. I showed him Claire's letter, letting him read the quiet confession of inadequate motherhood. Then, I showed him a recent passage from Cora's letter about learning to fix the broken machinery. "Your mother made a terrible, unforgivable mistake," I said, my voice steady. "She chose desperation over integrity. She tried to erase me. But she is paying the price for that mistake, and she is slowly trying to rebuild herself." Ethan listened quietly, his eyes fixed on the pages. When he finished reading, he didn't cry. He looked up, his gaze clear and mature. "So she was never really bad," he summarized. "She was just really, really scared." "That is a very wise way to put it," I replied, feeling a profound wave of relief wash over me. She was scared, and that fear led her to do things that hurt the people who loved her most. But now you know the truth, Ethan, and that truth is the lock and key to our freedom. I told him I would continue reading his mother's letters and relaying necessary information, but that the decision to have a relationship with her when she was released, and on what terms, would ultimately be his and his alone. He asked one final question. "Grandma, when you were in that place in Costa Rica, were you scared that you would forget who you were?" "Yes," I admitted honestly. "That was the most terrifying thing of all." "But you didn't," he concluded. "You remembered." "I remembered," I confirmed. That moment was my true release. I had passed on the legacy of survival and truth. I had given Ethan the tools to navigate his own complicated emotional inheritance without shame or silence. I didn't hear from Cora again for a long time. The letters stopped after that final, insightful one about her fear. I assumed she was focusing entirely on her sentence, applying the same fierce, single-minded focus she used on betrayal to the process of rehabilitation. 2 years later, I received a short, official notification from the parole board. Cora had been denied parole after her first hearing. She had accepted the denial without appeal, stating she needed more time to prepare for real life. My life with Ethan settled into a quiet, profound normalcy. He grew into a responsible, kind young man. He still knew hardship, but he also knew stability. One day, he came home from college orientation, holding a small, smooth lemon in his hand. "The tree is doing great, Grandma," he said, smiling. "It's finally producing good fruit." We made a pitcher of fresh lemonade, perfectly balanced this time, sweet but with a pleasant tartness. As I watched him drink, I realized the lesson of the betrayal wasn't about the money, the house, or even the pain. It was about the fundamental difference between the facade of love, Cora's attempts to use me, and the foundation of love, my unwavering, sacrificial presence. I had lost my comfortable life, but I had gained my dignity, my grandson, and a fierce, unbreakable knowledge of my own strength. I was a survivor, and my final act was ensuring that the innocent life I saved would not have to survive in silence. The cycle was finally broken. Dot's story is a powerful reminder that stability is built on truth, not fear. If you were moved by this incredible fight for dignity and justice, please like and share this video. And if you have a story of silent revenge or family drama, send it to us at womenstoriess@segmail.com.